So in this video, we're going to look at section 4.3, factoring trinomials. So remember, trinomials have the form where it's three terms. And so we're going to focus on the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is going to equal 1. So we have trinomials in the form like x squared plus bx plus c. Now b may be negative, so it could be minus a number, and c can be negative, so it can be minus a number as well. So for this form, the first term is always x squared, and the coefficient, the number in front, is always a 1. And that's what we're looking for this form. The variable is an exponent of 2. Okay, so whatever this variable is, if it's an x, it has an exponent of 2. The middle term is bx. So the coefficient is whatever the number b is. Again, b can be positive or negative. And the variable needs to be the same variable. So if this was like a y squared, then this needs to be a y. Same as the first term, but the exponent has to be 1, or it's just going to be x or y or z by itself. Okay. The last term is the constant. Okay, and the constant, again, is the number without a variable. And so the variable is none. There is no variable. So the constant is just some number added at the end or subtracted at the end. Okay, so this is the form that we're looking at. So if we look at these, we're going to circle the trinomials in the form x squared plus bx plus c. So I would pause the video for a minute and circle the ones that you think are in this form. And then once you are done, you can hit play again and then check your answer. Okay, so it should just be A and B. This is in the form that x squared plus bx plus c. And again, b and c could be negative. This one does not work because A, in this case, is 2 and not 1. Okay, so there's a number in front of the x squared, so it's not 1, so that doesn't work. Okay, this one is in the correct format. D does not work because of this x cubed. Okay? It has to be an x squared or a y squared in the first term, or a z squared, something squared. And then this last one does not work because this y does not match the initial variable. So those are all not trinomials. So again, I could have like y squared minus 2x plus 3. That's in the, nope, sorry. Y squared minus 2y plus 3. This is in the correct form because the first variable is squared. The next variable is that same variable to the first power and then a constant at the end. So just to kind of illustrate what we're going to do, we're going to go back and think about in chapter 3, multiplying these binomials. So same thing, I want you to pause and I want you to do 2a and 2b, and then you can come and check your answers. So these are what we should get. We're distributing this x to both of them, and then we're distributing the -3 to both, and we should get this, and then we can combine our middle terms and get 2x. Okay, and for b, you should multiply it, and this should be your final answer. So what we notice is if you look at the middle term of both of these, so I have a 2x here, and I have an 8x here. If you look at the original numbers, like -3 and 5, and if you think about, okay, how do I get 2 from -3 to 5? Well, what I would do is I would do -3 plus 5 and that gives me a 2. So adding these two numbers gives me that middle number. The same is true for B. If I add the two numbers, 2 plus 6, and I get 8, and that's my middle number. So the coefficient for the middle term, and we call that B, is found by adding the last two numbers. Okay, and when I mean the last two numbers in each set of parentheses, so the -3 and the 5. The last term, the C, so this -15 or this 12, is found by multiplying. So if I do -3 times 5, I get -15. If I do 2 times 6, I get 12. So the last term, C, the constant, is found by multiplying the last two numbers. And we're going to keep this in mind because what we're going to do is we're going to factor. So we're going to actually start with the x squared plus 2x minus 15, and we're going to factor it to this. And in this section, we're going to learn how do we do that. Okay, so for the steps, what we're going to do is first you need to make sure the trinomial is in the correct form. And again, the correct form is x squared plus bx plus c. And you may need to rearrange terms because you need the squared first, then x to the first, and then the constant. We need it in standard form. Then we're going to identify our b and our c, and we want to make sure we include the sign for both numbers. Okay. So we're going to do this example with our steps. So we have our x squared plus 2x minus 3. That is in the correct form. Okay, I'm going to identify b and c. So my b is that number in front of the x, which is 2. And my c is the number added or subtracted at the end, which is 3, and we keep the sign, so -3. Okay. So what I usually do is I make a chart to help me with this. So we're going to write two sets of parentheses, each starting with the variable. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, we know that if it's a trinomial like this, if it factors, it will always factor into two binomials, because we know when we multiply two binomials, we end up getting a trinomial. This first term is always the variable to the first power. So we put x and x, because x times x is giving me that x squared. So I always put the variable to the first power in the first spot of both set of parentheses. Then we are going to list all the pair of numbers that multiply to c. And after we do that, we want to determine which pair of numbers from the previous step add to b. Okay. So remember, we found that these two numbers have to add to the middle number and multiply to the last. So we usually make this chart. We put c first. So we put -3. And we need to write the factors, or what multiplies to -3. Okay, so this first column, we put what multiplies to c. And so c in this case is -3. So I'm trying to find what multiplies to -3. And I'm going to write all those factors like we talked about in 4.1 here. So the only thing that multiplies to -3, there's two options: -3 times 1, or I could switch my signs and make it +3 times -1. So those are my two options. And unlike when we did this before, I do need to think about both options. Okay. And then what we want to do is we want to find the one that adds to b, okay, or adds to 2. So I'm going to add these. So I'm going to do -3 plus 1. And if I add that, I get -2. And it has to be the same number and the same side. So this does not work. This is not my option. But if I do 3 plus -1, then I get a +2. And so this one works. So these are going to be my factors that I want. Okay. And so what I do is I put those factors. So it's a +3. I put +3. and a -1, I put -1. So I'm putting the two numbers that multiply to this and add to that as my second two numbers, just like we saw happened when we're multiplying it. And then you can always check it by multiplying out or distributing. So we're doing like x times x minus 1 and 3 times x minus 1, or you can do your FOIL and we get x squared minus x plus 3x minus 3, and that gives me x squared plus 2x minus 3. Okay. And it's really easy to make a mistake on these, so checking them just takes like an extra minute or two, and it's a good idea to check them. Okay. So this is how we factor a trinomial. Now, if you have a good number sense and you don't need to list these all out, or you don't even need to make the chart, that's perfectly fine. But this is helpful for those who need to write all the steps out. Okay, so kind of going back, we place one of the numbers in each set of the parentheses to complete the binomial factors. And then we check our answer by multiplying using either FOIL or distributive, whichever way you do that. Okay, so let's do one more example in this video, and then I'll make other videos for the other problems. So for example 2, we're going to do the same thing. So I have my form x squared. So x squared plus bx plus c. And the first thing I do is figure out what b and c are. So b is -6 and c is a +5. Okay. Then I'm going to make my table. Again, if you can do this without it, that's fine. Okay, but we put what multiplies to c, which is 5, and adds to b, which is -6. Okay. So when I have a +5, I know it has to be a positive times a positive. And so the only, positive times a positive, so it's 5 times 1. But if I add those, I get 6 and not a -6. So I also know that if I do a negative times a negative, I also get a positive. So I could also do -5 times -1, because a negative times a negative is a positive. And if I add those, I get -6. And so these are my factors that work. And so again, I always write it in my format: two binomials multiplied together. Whatever this variable is, I put that variable in both of the first spots, but to the first power. And then I put these numbers: -5, -1. The order does not matter. So if you put the 1 here and the 5 here, it will be the same thing. And then we check by multiplying it out. So if I check and multiply it out, I get x times x, which is x squared. X times -1, which is -x. -5 times x is -5x. -5 times -1 is +5. So I get x squared minus, this combines to 6x plus 5. Okay, and then it's right. It matches my original. Okay. So that is how we factor trinomials.